And we're recording. Cool. Let's start our community call. This time with the amazing Kevin Owocki from Gitcoin. And Gitcoin was the first major app that adopted BrightID, integrated with BrightID. And we know that they are fully concerned and fully exploring the tools to fight back the Sybils in their project. We're here to learn about their experience with BrightID and Kevin's whole take on Sybil resistance. And yeah, I want to give it to Kevin. So then we're gonna keep the conversation going.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Owocki from Gitcoin, which is a place that you can get coins if you're working on digital public goods like open source software. My goal, my big idea is let's give the thousands, millions of software engineers out there a crypto economic reason to work on public goods in open source software as opposed to working in corporate America and on private goods, or maybe alongside working on private goods. I think our digital infrastructure is just systemically important to the world today, and I want to make sure that it's properly funded so that it can be anti-fragile. On the systemic level and on the individual level, it's just about giving software engineers an opportunity to pay their mortgage while they're working on open source instead of working on it nights and weekends as like a side project from their job that they get paid for. So that's our deep reason for being.
Love it.
So I guess you guys want to hear about quadratic funding, or just let me know which direction people are interested in going, and I can sort of tell you about how what we're doing intersects with Sybil resistance.
Yeah, I think it'd be really interesting for people to know why Gitcoin needs Sybil resistance and why it gets Sybil attacked. Yeah,
totally. So I will just share my screen real quick if that's allowed. Oh no, wait, host disabled participant screen sharing.
We'll fix it.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm just I'm a very visual person, and explaining things through examples is what I wanted to do here. So I'm sharing my screen right here, and you'll see that I just claimed my POAP. So thank you to whoever sent me the BrightID community call POAP right here. It's very cool. But what I really wanted to show you all is this calculator that we made called WTFisQF.com. The reason why we made this calculator is that Gitcoin Grants relies on this economic paper called Quadratic Funding, which was written by Vitalik Buterin and Zoe Hitzig and Glenn Weil. And there's this really beautiful, elegant 31-page paper that you can read that's linked in the footer here about why this is the mathematically optimal way to fund public goods. But one of my insights as someone who spends a lot of time on Twitter and builds websites is that ain't nobody got time to read a 30-page paper. And so we built this shiny web calculator in order to explain quadratic funding to people and basically allow them to taste it, to interact with it, and specifically the ability to work with the math behind quadratic funding. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through an example of what Gitcoin Grants does, and then the sort of why Sybil resistance matters will fall out from that. So Gitcoin Grants, our mission is to fund open source software, which is a digital public good, and quadratic funding is the mathematically optimal way to fund public goods in a democratic way, at least according to Vitalik and Glenn. So basically what we do is we raise a matching pool, which we are going to deploy to open source software projects in the Ethereum community. And most recently, our matching pool was $500,000. And every quarter we raise 500K. And then we deploy that capital from the matching pool according to the results of a crowdfunding campaign. So basically the way this works is that the crowdfunding campaign and the matching pool distribution are coupled with each other, and the matching amount gets applied to the results of the crowdfunding campaign using the quadratic funding formula. And basically you can see right here that if I have two grants that both raise $10, and one of them raises $10 from 10 contributors, and another raises $10 from one contributor, then the one that has the broader base of support is going to have more of the matching funds given to them. And what's really powerful about that is that if you think about like the UI of quadratic funding and just sort of the game theory of public goods, there's this problem called the free rider problem. And the free rider problem is basically, well, if I already have access to open source software, why would I bother supporting it financially? I can free ride on the system and not have to contribute to it. And so that's what's called the free rider problem in open source software. But this is like a multipolar trap problem where basically if enough people free ride on public goods, then the system collapses because the persons who's maintaining it can't pay their mortgage and they can't pay their bills just by working on open source software. And what's really magic about quadratic funding is that it gives you a rational economic reason to contribute to public goods, because your donation on Gitcoin grants of $10 can be matched with $75 or $200 or $500. If a project is widely democratically supported, then every individual contribution can just make a huge difference. And so if I just add a couple more $1 contributions here, you can just see the match amount going up a lot because new identities are added to the system. So this is really powerful. It's a great way of giving individual people, average people, the ability to steer which public goods are funded, and we basically make them put their money where their mouth is. If you care enough to give $1 to some project, then maybe it's a public good that's worth funding. But the problem with quadratic funding is that if I'm a malicious actor and I have $10 to deploy, well, why would I be a sucker and just do it with one identity? And so if you're a Sybil attacker, you can go in and you can make your match amount go way further by making up and manufacturing identities. And so that's the Sybil resistance problem with quadratic funding. And I'm happy to say that we've integrated with a handful of really amazing Sybil resistance tools within the Ethereum ecosystem, of which BrightID was the first one that we were really successful with. And we've got on the order of hundreds, or maybe in the low thousands now, of projects that, of BrightID accounts linked on Gitcoin. So I see BrightID possibly being a core piece of the infrastructure, not only for Gitcoin grants, but if we want to take this whole ecosystem from one CPU, one vote, or one token, one vote, to one human, one vote, and create digital democracy, I think BrightID is a core pillar of that. And I'm just happy that we can help spin the flywheel by sending y'all some users every quarter. So that's my TLDR. Happy to dive in where there's questions.
I had one specific thing, because I remember watching you. How nasty of Sybil attacks were you seeing from your end? Because I was trying to describe it from, like, I have a little experience of it, but it's pretty gnarly from like the back end, like viewing what's going on, and with the amount of economic incentive behind the Gitcoin, I'm curious how intricate some of these attacks became on this last round that you guys had.
Totally. Yeah. So we wrote a governance brief, which I'll just put into the Zoom chat right here, that kind of goes through all the different fun attacks that we've seen. They're fun in retrospect. They're not fun when we're going through it. And basically the answer to your question, Brandon, depends on like how you define a Sybil attack. Right now, we've got this architecture built in where if you integrate your BrightID to your Gitcoin profile, you get a bonus on top of your contribution. And in the future, the plan is to like rug the Sybil attackers by making it so that you have to have a BrightID to get a match at all. So right now it's optional, but in the future, we will define a new identity according to who has a BrightID, account or whatever. But right now, since it's optional, we're seeing people that would come up with like Brandon 1, Brandon 2, Brandon 3, and they all contribute to the same grant. And so the answer to your question, Brandon, like how bad is it, like what is the fraud tax that the system is paying with quadratic funding, depends on how you define Sybil attack. And things can present as a Sybil attack if they have like that username pattern that presents as a Sybil attack. If they share an IP address, if they share an Ethereum address, there's a bunch of different flags that we've got in the system where we can kind of compare and contrast data sets. And the key point here is that just because something presents as a Sybil attack doesn't necessarily mean that it is a Sybil attack. And so this is where governance comes in and policy making comes in. And, we're kind of starting to have decentralized governance around making a policy for civil resistance. And in grants round 10, which is coming up in June 10th, you'll see that. To directly answer your question, we think the fraud tax in grants round 9 was around 2%. And so basically $2 million was passed between the community. Well, 1.85 if you want to be technical, and about 2% of that we think went to the wrong projects because of fraud. So like 40K is what my math says there. So I know that was long-winded. I'm just like excited to talk about this with a group that's engaged. So I'm pretty pumped that you guys care about this stuff.
Deeply. So Kevin, when I watched this round, I'm the one that gets all the emails for BrightID donations, and I saw a whole bunch of small donations that sure looked like they weren't really people. Teeny tiny fractions of a donation with usernames that no human would choose for themselves. When I didn't dig in at all on those, but it just looked on its face to me that like a huge portion of those were not real people. How did you guys look at something like that?
Well, I mean, I have a couple different reactions. One is that, wow, in the bull market, when there's so much money going around, it's just so much more chaotic to be watching this and to see all the new ways attackers have evolved with so much more money in the system. The second thing is like a sense of awe, like kind of that in the Ethereum community, we've gone from complaining about how transactions cost $90 to do a transaction to transactions being so cheap on a layer 2 that we have to worry about spam. Like, it's just kind of like a little bit of a head spinner for me as someone who participates in the Ethereum community. The notifications are definitely annoying when you have a bunch of small, like 10-cent donations coming in. Like, it's not even worth sending an email at that point. And so, we definitely are thinking about tweaking the notification settings for the next round because of that. I think the main thing for me is just making sure that we've got a defined Sybil resistance policy that is ratified by the community, that not the Gitcoin team, like the community has chosen a Sybil resistance policy, and that we just don't count those contributions towards the matching amounts. Because the way quadratic funding works is that on the first day, there's like the starting gun where people will race to get the most contributions from the most people, because that increases their match multiplier. And then once you have a high match multiplier, then more and more people will contribute to your project because their dollar goes so much further. And so it's about making sure that the Sybil attackers can't artificially juice their match multiple is like the most important system design thing that I'm sort of focused on there. But, I'm just like, every time someone says Ethereum doesn't scale, I want to shake them and I want to say, you don't understand layer 2. Like, it can be so cheap if we can just get people to onboard onto these layer 2 things. And once transactions are as cheap as air, I think that there's a whole new set of problems around transaction spam that like, you could do a financial DDoS account on someone, or DDoS attack on someone, by just giving them a bunch of $1 donations and that they have to report on their taxes or something like that. It's just kind of like a crazy new world when you have to worry about transactions that are so cheap. And we're just starting to grasp on that. I would never represent that we've handled it yet. We're just starting to get our hands around that.
This round, so I think this was the third round that I did ZK Sync, I think. And it was the first time that it was just smooth. The first time I had all kinds of problems. The second time I had a few problems. And this time it just happened right away. The first time I tried with no issues. That was really nice to have it go so smooth, but also to have gone through the harder process and like, see, we really have evolved. It doesn't start off easy, but we can make these things work over time.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say that, I'm super proud that we integrated ZK Sync last summer. And people are still integrating L2 into their app. And it was definitely rough at the start. We tried at first to integrate like deeply with ZK Sync's API and like keep the user on Gitcoin when they were checking out, but there's just too many moving parts. And so now we've moved over to this bulk checkout experience where we just pass off the user, and then ZK Sync will pass back the payload to us once they've actually checked out. And I got to say, having them end-to-end handle the checkout and having us just do what we do best, which is manage the QF formula, has been a way simpler, smoother way of integrating. And I'm really curious to see how other dApps integrate with layer 2s. I would really like just have like, with Wallet Connect, how you can just go and you can like integrate with MetaMask or I forget the other ones like Argent, all these other wallets. I would really like to have that for a layer 2. Like I could just drop in like a blockchain equivalent of like a stripe.js as a payment provider, and then I can just get the transaction IDs back when the users broadcast them. Like I don't have to worry about any of those concerns associated with the layer 2. But we're still getting there. And I think Pedro from Wallet Connect actually said he's working on that exact thing. So I'm excited to have better tools for developers to integrate layer 2. I think it'll increase adoption by a lot.
So I have a question that I've been thinking about, and I think you've been thinking about this too. So does Gitcoin, I think I've seen that you've already started to do this. Is there a portable quadratic funding toolkit? So let's say that I wanted quadratic voting or quadratic funding in my project, whatever that project might be. Is there an open source way, like a platform that I can start building on that will get me the quadratic funding without having to reinvent the wheel?
Sure. Yeah, we do have a Python library and a JavaScript library that is available on WTFisQF.com. I don't know how widely used they are. And guys, I'm going to let you in on a dirty little secret. Quadratic funding is not that complicated. It's just the square, like the addition of all of the square roots of the contributions. Like that's literally like you can implement it in 4 lines of code. It just sounds complicated. And honestly, the hardest part is the Sybil resistant identity part. It's not the QF formula. So I am happy to say that you can do the QF formula in 4 lines of code, but you have to integrate BrightID if you actually want to have the hard part solved for you, which is the Sybil resistance.
So Kevin, we're super excited that BrightID is one of the Sybil resistance things you're doing. Which of the other ones have been successful and feel like it's working and people are actually using?
Totally. Yeah. So if you go to your Gitcoin profile and you click over to your trust bonus tab, which I think I'm sharing my screen again.
You are.
Yeah. So basically, this is my Gitcoin profile, a bunch of stuff that I've done on the platform. And then if you go to the trust bonus tab, you can see all of the different Sybil resistance providers that we've added. I would say that we're kind of optimizing for the intersection of decentralization aligned and also identity provider. But there are certain tools that are both of those things, and there are certain tools that are in really one category and not the other. BrightID is at the top of the list because we think it offers probably the biggest match bonus and trust. Idena, it seems like has a lot of traction in the community, and so we've got a decent trust bonus on that. We have integrated with POAP. So basically, if you have a POAP badge on your address, the idea is that you're probably a human of some sort. And so that'll give you a match bonus. And then we're kind of mucking around with some old world Web 2 Sybil resistance techniques, but those have been kind of deprioritized because I'm not sure they're totally value aligned. On the roadmap, we've got Proof of Humanity, ENS reverse lookup, Deuniter, and those are the ones that I'm really excited about, is getting those integrated before grants round 10 in 2 months. But I guess the TLDRs, BrightID, and Idena are the ones that are on the top of my list right now.
So I have a question. Like I tried to link my POAP, but like all my POAPs are on XDAI. So like I have like 25 or a little bit more in my wallet. I had to take one out, so to be able to get the matching funds. So it took me a little bit of money.
I'm sorry if you had to spend $100 to bring your POAP on mainnet for us. We actually just put in a PR to accept XDAI POAPs now. So
cool.
Let me actually see if it's live, because I have an XDAI POAP, but not a mainnet POAP.
Yeah, you could use your nice bright
I
ID.
just tried it. I just
Yeah.
tried to link my XDAI POAPs. I'm in the same boat as Carlos, but I didn't pay the gas to pull mine out to mainnet. I only have XDAI. I just tried it, signing it on XDAI. It didn't work.
Got
So,
it. Mine says an
thanks,
error
Enzo.
occurred. Please try later, which
Yeah,
makes
same.
me think I need to, cool. I'm going to actually tell our engineers about that real quick. We kind of like are in this cycle right now where every grants round, it's just kind of like hair on fire, keep everything afloat kind of like ops. And then in between rounds, it's planning for the next round and giving the team a little bit of a rest and everything. So we'll definitely have to get this fixed before the next round starts.
Yeah. So I want to talk about how does your crusade against Sybil's go beyond Gitcoin? Your personal crusade against Sybil's, how is that carrying?
Yeah, no one's ever called it a crusade before, so forgive me while I digest that's how it's perceived.
Your effort.
I mean, it started off as just like a fun meme thing that I do on Twitter to just like highlight the problem of Sybil resistance. But I do think that as I've learned more about this stuff, I'd like to think that we can all be evangelists for the importance of privacy preserving digital identity. I just think the surface area for blockchain systems would be so much higher if we had digital identity in them. Like, think about in your daily life how much you care about identity when you transact with people. If you hire an Uber driver, you want to know who they are and do a reference check on them before you get in the car with them. If you invest in a company, you want to know that this startup founder doesn't have any like wire fraud like charges on their criminal background. Like, almost all financial transactions I just think identity is a crucial part of them. And especially when you consider that for 95% of the world, their financial life is their jobs and not speculative investments. I just think that, if we're going to build the future of work and it's going to include blockchain, then it's going to have to be decentralized identity. And so just kind of like memeing that world into existence and talking about that world and educating people about why digital identity is important is kind of like a side quest for me. And Sybil resistance is a subset of the decentralized identity problem that I think could unlock digital democracy. Like I said, could take us from one human, one token, one vote, one CPU, one vote to one human, one vote. And that's the kind of world I want to live in, is a digital democracy. And so educating people about the importance of that in order to get mainstream adoption and to have more democratic systems, I think is what I've been trying to do. But it may just look like a crusade or like me having fun on Twitter, which it's that also.
Great. Yeah. So you mentioned something that really strikes a chord with me, which is privacy preserving. So that is one of the things that just really bothered me about, I would say, the old school approach to bringing identity onto the internet, is that the approach seemed to be, well, if we throw enough your personal data at the problem, it'll just solve itself, right? And so, first of all, that's horrible for for people's like online life. The fact that scammers get a hold of your information and then wreak all sorts of havoc against you. And then not only that, but it's really not that effective. It's the determined attackers can find ways around any sort of so-called proof that they can get social security numbers, they can get copies of passports, whatever. So it's not as effective as you might think. So I see a balance in the solutions that, for example, are in the trust bonus. I see some like IDENA and BrightID where like you don't have to, like, no one really has to know anything about you except that you're unique.
Right.
And then I see some other ones where like if you looked at that, you're getting a little bit of information, like maybe a POAP, you might get a little bit of information about the person, like, okay, they went to this thing or whatever, or did this thing. And then you've got some like Twitter where it's like, okay, that you could potentially like reveal a lot about yourself, or you know, phone number, things like that. So on that spectrum, it's like, yeah, I mean, how I guess for Gitcoin, how much depends on like your actual, I guess I would call it identity, in that like it's what you did or who you are, or like what you've done in the past, or your credentials. Like how much of that is actually important, and how much of that is like, we don't care, we just need to know you're unique.
Yeah, great observations. I found myself caught between two design goals. The first is that we don't want to make more privacy problems for the world. And I always think about like when I go into a liquor store and I give the clerk my ID to show that I'm over 21, I'm revealing my home address to that person, which is like scary, but it would be even scarier in a world in which everything has infinite memory and storage, you know, to like give that information over to people. And that's what the digital world is. And so I'm really excited about zero knowledge proofs, where like I could just present to the clerk an ID, or sorry, a proof that I'm over 21, and they don't get to see my name or address. And like, I've heard stories about like women who have gone to like check out at grocery stores and they get like Facebook messages from the cashier afterwards, because like that kind of shit is fucked up. Like, you know, I just like don't want to contribute to that world. And so I'm a big believer in not contributing to that. On the other end of the spectrum, I try to be very pragmatic with the systems that I build, insofar as that I want to create adoption of these technologies. And so doing what's practical in order to solve our mission is to grow and sustain open source software, right? And so I want to create impact there. And one of the things that I feel a little bit sort of like there's like a trade-off space is with the fact that like zero knowledge proofs aren't quite there yet. And most of the digital identity systems out there are Web 2 native and not Web 3 native, and the need to have an impact. And so what I would like to do is like create Gitcoin as a bridge between those two things, get people comfortable with Web3 primitives like signed messages and zero knowledge proofs, and they can dip their toe in the water before they actually go all the way down that route. And then, you know, it's up to Gitcoin to be responsible stewards of whatever data that we have about these people, and to not reveal it, like not have data leaks. And I think that as we grow, we have to take that pretty seriously. To answer your question, I care more about proof of unique humanness for quadratic funding, but only like I care about it in a fuzzy way. With quadratic funding, it really only matters if you're Sybil attacking the system with like 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 identities. Because if you have one false identity, like you verify one account on BrightID and you verify one on Idena, I don't really care because you don't move the match amount that much. It's when there's a massive Sybil attack that is when the quadratic funding formulas get really swayed. And so I'm kind of solving for what's practical now and fuzzy Sybil resistance, which I would define as like you can't have more than like 2 or 3 identities without the system really catching you. So yeah, I mean, I know that these are, you know, like it's a little bit stigmatized to be more centralized and to be on the more pragmatic end of that spectrum, and I'm sensitive to that. But you know, I think that I want the community to hold us to being more decentralized and more pure as the technologies and tools become available over the next market cycle, to really only focus on those really new world technologies, and hopefully build a bridge from the old world to the new world is the role that we're going to play here.
Yeah, I like that bridge mentality. I think that's a really cool role to play. And I want to plant a seed with you because I've heard something similar from Opolis, which I think you're familiar with. They have a really interesting goal. So when I was first learning about them, I just thought, okay, this is a cool way for people in the United States to be able to you know, manage their taxes and manage their benefits. And you've got this co-employer. That's pretty cool. But then as I dove deeper into it and talked to them, I realized that they have this same Web 2, Web 3 bridge mentality where they realize that the work that they're doing with background checks and stuff like that, this sort of centralized plus Web 2 stuff that they're doing, it can be used as an on-ramp for people into Web 3. So you get people because they're exploring these decentralized identity technologies, the ones, I guess, there's that self-sovereign word that gets thrown around, but the point is that you control it, and that you limit, and it's privacy preserving, and it's controlled by you rather than controlled by Google. So they're exploring. So once you go through their process, which is very much an old school process, once you go through that, then you can get some of these, I guess we'll call them Web3 certifications, credentials that can go around with you, that you can use in the types of apps like that are trying to provide civil resistance, or that are trying to accept those credentials somewhere else so that you can reuse them. And so I think that's really cool. And just to sort of plant a seed with what we're doing with BrightID. In BrightID, there's a notion of there has to be some sort of pre-trust, like pre-established trust seeded into the graph at certain locations for it to work. Otherwise, an attacker could just build the same graph structure as the honest part of the graph, and the analysis would have no way to tell the difference. So there has to be some of this trust has to come from somewhere, outside. And so if you look at something like Opolis or Gitcoin, the ones that are building these bridges, those can be imported as trust into a graph analysis method. That's really important, because right now it's kind of this cumbersome, slow process to bring trust into BrightID. You set up a community. The community has to be vetted by the seed DAO, and then it gets voted in, and then it gets to become a seed community, and then it gets to have this sort of pre-trusted seed clout in the BrightID graph. But imagine a different world where you go through some steps, like say on Gitcoin or on Opolis, and by going through those steps, you create trust for yourself in the graph. That doesn't mean that you're automatically going to be verified in BrightID, but what it means is that that trust branches out from you, rather than branching out from like some seed group that had to go through this lengthy process to get that. So if we have lots of those, then we have lots of little. So instead of like a few little clusters of like highly concentrated trust, you have this smattering of like everybody's got a little trust from all the things that they are doing in the real world. That just adds to their.
So if I could just say back to you what I think I heard is like, BrightID is based off of like a web of trust model, or I think of y'all as like EdgeRank, like PageRank. And you need a trusted seed in order to start seed the system with trust. And then all trust flows out from that trusted seed in a traditional system design. But if we can build a system where people can build their own intrinsic, organic pieces of trust, then you don't need the trusted seed as much, because there's I'm going to use a word from science here, but like exogenous like sources of trust. Like think about it like an ocean vent, how like an ocean vent gives out energy because of geothermal energy, and there's organisms that can live off of that. We almost need to create like this exothermic. I'm not sure if exogenous or exothermic actually is the word I'm looking for. Sources of trust that are seeded into the web of trust. And I guess Adam, like what is that? What do those trust thermal vents look like? Like how do you have just like objective trust that you can drop into the system? Because isn't all trust relative to like values or like agreements and stuff? Like is trust n-dimensional, or is it just this objectivist thing that you can just put into the system? Can you give me a tangible example of how you think that should work?
Yeah. So Yeah, to answer your question, I mean, it does depend on like who trusts whom. So if you have a graph analysis, it's really up to whoever designs that graph analysis method to decide, like, do they think that Gitcoin's method of assigning, like giving someone a credential that they've been through some process, is that meaningful? Is that going to add more than it's going to take away? The way I evaluate that as someone who's designing like an anti-Sybil algorithm is I look at the existing algorithm and I say, okay, there's a region or maybe several regions of Sybils that are trying to get in, and then there's the honest region, and then there's honest people that are trying to get in to the already verified region. So is adding this exogenous information going to bring in more of the honest people into the graph than it's going to bring Sybils into the graph? And if the answer is yes, then I add it in. So it doesn't have to be perfect. I don't have to have complete trust in the system. I don't have to. It's sort of a subjective evaluation of how valuable do I think it is, and there could be many different possible interpretations of it.
You know what this reminds me of is, like, in software, the difference between convention and configuration. So basically, like with Vim, I could go up to my ears with customizing my own preferences, but like the average user is just like, give me a base configuration that works. It also reminds me of Uniswap token lists. Like I can import any token into Uniswap, but Uniswap gives me intelligent defaults. I think that just having those intelligent defaults in, like, a list for the average user who isn't going to write their own is something that could be super important, and curating those is perhaps its own problem. But I'm sure you've thought a lot about that already.
Yeah. From my perspective.
Oh yeah, Philip. Sorry, go ahead. But there's something we've been working on together that I think is really cool.
Yeah, let's get into that in a minute. But so what I've always said is that there should be there's lots of versions of the truth, the answer in BrightID. And what's great is the multiple levels of choice that happens. So an application gets to decide where do you want to get your truth from. They pick a node, multiple nodes, run their own node, run whatever algorithms they want. And there's always other people doing it differently. If the one you're using is not the best anymore, move over to something else. And again, those are separate choices being made. The applications in the node there are separate and both trying to optimize to have the best answer. So I think that level of competition will be really helpful. I also think that it's going to end up being a long tail power distribution kind of thing where most applications just use like 2 or 3 are the ones that almost everything uses. But because there are 10,000 of them, there's like always a churn, there's always competition in the long end, so that you can't just sit on your laurels and be the best one forever because someone else is chomping to get that number 2 slot.
That's interesting. There's so many different vectors here, but what I think is cool about BrightID is that it's architected that if you lose faith in one vector, it's very easy to move over to another one.
Yes. I dream of BrightID sort of, it's sort of playing a Uniswap kind of role. It's just a neutral playground where all this stuff exists. And then you do with it what you want, but it's there in a way that just everybody can freely play.
Right, totally. I can't wait for this world to exist. It's just like I see the seedling of it. I can't wait for it to grow into a giant oak.
Yeah. So Adam is bringing up a new project that we've just started working on with Raid Guild. I think I've dreamed of for a long time. So this is going to be a way that people that want to play the BrightID game. So this isn't all users, but if you want to be good at helping to label the graph, you can be incentivized to sort of stake and bet on your opinions about the graph and about users. And if you're good at this game over time, you can win. And if you're bad at this game, you'll pay to be bad at it. And I think that we can create from a user standpoint, this sort of game to pull in pull in information, which then can be added to algorithms to make a much more accurate analysis. And then there's another game on top of that where, all right, now you've got sort of like multiple algorithms, multiple nodes that can play a higher level game where it's like, all right, y'all are trying to label the whole graph as best you can, and you're competing for it over time, and we'll find out who is best at this.
That's interesting. So like, as Gitcoin's integrated with BrightID, like, I don't know if this is the seed that you're planting in my head, and it might have just taken a second to germinate, but like, can we contribute data back and say like, this identity contributed to grants, like we think that their trust rating is X, like, so it becomes like a multiplayer game of building the trust.
Correct. And the way I see it is what you're going to report back is fairly binary information. You're going to give us the answers that you conclude, but not the methods. Right. So you can say this account, right, this pseudonymous account right here, I'm not telling you why I have extreme faith that it's valid, but I do have extreme faith that it's valid.
Yeah. It's almost like we become an importer of like Idena and proof of humanity back into BrightID in that, like in that world. But also other trust information that's sort of coming out of the Gitcoin grant system would be sort of interesting.
100%.
Yeah, because so just one signal that I think is interesting is when we saw what you were talking about, how a Sybil attack presents itself in Gitcoin.
Yeah.
So a Sybil attack usually presents itself from everything I've heard and what I read in the excellent write-up that you did, is that you see a lot of really small donations. So if on the flip side you see a larger donation, you can kind of rule, perhaps at least with some decent probability, rule out that was a Sybil. The fact that they did that particular account, although maybe that person may have created some other duplicates or something, at least that account right there is not one of the duplicates that they were playing with, because otherwise they probably would have, if they had made 20 accounts, they'd probably do a small contribution with each and not have one of them do a larger donation or something like that. So so information like that is like pretty interesting, I think, to BrightID. Of course, it's like then it's this game where it's like, okay, if everyone knows that's what's important, then they start to say, okay, well, I better make larger donations or whatever, so that I don't look like a Sybil or whatever. But
interesting.
Anyways,
yeah, there's sort of just like this virtual, and these things are also just subject to network effects, where basically like the more information I have in these digital identity systems, the more useful they become, the more information I want to put into them, and it becomes this like virtuous cycle. And it's up to us as the early adopters to just get that flywheel rolling. I feel like I like walked into an interview in a community call, but maybe we're forming some sort of partnership here, or like DID Alliance, and I'm so here for it. Like, let's fucking do it. We just got to like survive the next market cycle and spin that flywheel until it's inevitable.
Nice. So Kevin, here's an example I like to give in this game that we're imagining. So the two most valuable things that you can do in the game are provide information that's not already there. So like a new user comes in, label that new user. Or so what that would mean is you should be incentivized to go find people that are not on BrightID and connect to them. And let's say that Michael regularly goes and finds brand new communities and brings them into BrightID. When we look back, and like when he first connects them, he goes to a college and he connects to 100 kids. They all densely interconnect to each other, but he's the only bridge between that region and the main graph. That's a perfect Sybil. It looks like a Sybil attack, right? Tiny little bridge, But the reality is, they are users. We want to get those users verified as fast as possible so that they can enjoy the system. But it's going to be a problem because they look like Sybils. But if we can look back and we see, hey, every time Michael does this, a month later, those people do end up verified because he is being an honest actor in this. Well, now it's predictive. If Michael goes and does it again tomorrow, I would make a bet. I might be willing to make a bet that Michael's things will play out to be accurate. So we can now forecast the future of what's going to happen based on sort of people's past actions. And if at some point we realize, no, Michael is creating giant civil regions, like then people will stop betting on Michael's choices.
Yeah, it's kind of like a prediction market, proof of stake way of creating more trust in the system by adding crypto economic primitives around it. Yeah, I can see it. I think that it, like, do y'all have like a layer 2 that you're going to be building these crypto economic games on? Because it seems like it's probably too expensive for the mainnet, right?
It's definitely not going to be. And as we're starting off, so very intentionally, this is an application that uses BrightID but is not BrightID. Right. So right, that's like why we're hiring Raid Guild to build it, because like this is not core to BrightID. What I imagine is this is going to quickly become the most accurate node on the BrightID network. And it can figure out everything. I mean, it can even do it Web 2 style. It doesn't even need to be on a blockchain. You know, if we figure out that's the best place to put it, great, fine. But the important thing is just that it comes to exist. The other fun thing you can do is, so the other super valuable thing, other than bringing new people in, is also having non-consensus opinions. If everybody thinks something is true and you know it to be false, you should bet against it. So it's like, oh yeah, everyone says that Mono's account is legit. If you're the one person that's like, no, Mono's account is bullshit, you should bet against it. And eventually, when you are proven to be correct, you'll get a much bigger payout than just like going along with the group. And you should persist in those opinions, even over time. Like, dude, if you're sure, and the same thing, if the graph says, hey, this is all civil, and you're like, no, dude, that's my mom. I am completely confident that she's legit. Time will tell. She is going to be verified. So I should bet hard on that. And eventually I'll be proven right. Yeah,
it's almost like the sort of like Silicon Valley ethos of believing in things before everyone else believes in them is a way of generating alpha. But I like that. I would like to, whenever all this stuff launches, like I would love to build I have a side quest where I want to build crypto economic games that help create civil resistance. And I would love to just like funnel if I can funnel Gitcoin's brand or community or builders or anything towards it, then I would just love to do that. So when's the Raid Guild prototype going to be ready? I'd love to play with it.
So literally they sent me like the MVP scope last night. So you know, we've had 2 scoping calls, but they're gonna like jump right in. They're excited to build it. And as soon as we have something and need people to start playing with it, you're on the list. For sure. Yeah. Oh man, there's just such a deeper integration we could do between our projects. And just so you know, this is like me telling you at the end of our community call. Grants round 10, it's going to be up to the community to make this decision, but I'm almost certain that after the number of attacks we saw in Grants round 9, that the community is going to want to take trust bonus, which is optional right now, and make it a trust requirement. So we're taking like, you know, 2,000. I think we have like 5,000 users per grants round, and we're making it optional for them to verify. And now we're going to put a big giant like door that they have to go through in order to do matching contributions, probably. And I think that's going to cause a lot more people going through Gitcoin towards BrightID in grants round 10, just because it's the happy path, not just a side quest at this point. And we should like tighten up the UX or like tighten up the integration or something, just for my own sanity, reducing the support requests. So I'm into like building these deeper wedges of civil resistance, but then there's also just like, you know, what's the FTUX, what's the first time user experience for someone coming through the integration. So maybe I'll circle up with you privately in order to talk a little bit more about that. And you know, if you have any objections to us sending you that many users who want to get verified, then let me know. We've been taking really proactive steps recently to prepare for 10x growth. So you know, we've got over 10,000 verified users at this point. Over 2,000 people have linked BrightID to Gitcoin. I don't know how many of them done all the parts that like you would count them, but there are over 2,000 linked to Gitcoin.
Yeah, linked and verified, because
Linked
there's
and verified.
kind of like a funnel. They've gotten
Amazing.
completely through the funnel. Yeah.
So
Amazing.
yeah, and we're getting really close to having people using the next level harder of verification. And from a it's tricky because it's not we call it level 0 and like level 1, but level 1 starts to fragment because it's not really one thing. So Figment Learn, which is really nipping at your heels, they really want to become they want to leapfrog Gitcoin, but they've started, they now use a verification that requires that someone connect to their seed group. And that wouldn't be appropriate for Gitcoin necessarily, but just there would be many ways that people can choose to, what do you want to count as enough for a user?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm like a big Pareto optimal guy, like 20% of the effort for 80% of the results. And especially since the Sybil resistance gains on quadratic funding scale quadratically, I think that just like keeping people limited to not perfect Sybil resistance, but pretty good is kind of where I land. But how that turns out in the algorithm is an open question. So I don't know. I'll have to think on that and get back to you, especially since I see we're running out of time here. Can I flash my BrightID code before we all break?
Yes.
And
well, actually, let's. We usually do that after we stop recording.
Okay.
So that
Cool.
doesn't make it on YouTube.
Exactly, yeah. I want to wrap up and stop recording so we can start a group connection real quick. Thank you, Kevin, for being here. Really exciting conversation today. And thank you everyone for being with us. And yeah, I'm gonna stop recording now, and then we're gonna do a group connection together.
Thank you so much.
So everyone can feel fine turning their cameras on.
I'm so thrilled to be here. I really think that you all are working on a foundationally important part of the next web. So thank you for your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, we feel as aligned with Gitcoin as anything else that we touch.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
I appreciate that. I think that we're building a web of projects that are going to need Sybil resistance. And the thing that I've told Brian from Rabbit Hole and Aryan from CLR Fund and Santi from Proof of Humanity is that it's about growing the pie for everyone. And so hopefully we can meme Sybil resistance into existence, all doing it together.
I just want to mention that I want you to know that currently we have 7 connection parties every single day in 5 different languages, including Chinese, including Russian, Spanish, and Farsi, besides the ones that are in English. So we are fully capable of supporting the users that are coming up in the next round.
Amazing. Yeah, I recently we had all the connection ID the connection parties listed straight on Gitcoin, and now I'm just sending everyone to meet.brightid.org, which is awesome that you have that page available.
Perfectly fine. Have you seen
and multiple languages? I love the what's that?
Now it's like a calendar design that you can see all the upcoming ones. Yeah.
Well, and I just love how accessible it is, all these different languages too. That's super important. We got to get around to translating at some point. All right, should we do this? This is me.
Yes, I'm gonna stop recording.